you look at our brain sizes before versus after the agricultural revolution, you see a massive, not a massive, but like you start seeing a drop in the size of our brains. So historically, while we consistently started getting bigger and bigger and bigger brains, all of a sudden we start seeing a decline in the brain size, and more importantly, you start seeing also a decline in the stature. We start getting shorter, and you can actually see skeletal remains, and you can see our bones are more porous, they're weaker, they're more likely to break, they're more diseased, the teeth. So our wide jaws were no longer as wide, and so they shrunk. For the first time in history, you also start seeing misalignment of the teeth.
Dr. Sarah Zaldivar, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you so much, Inka, for having me.
I'm very excited about today's episode. I think it's gonna be so much fun and so insightful. You have so much to offer. So you're a professor of nutrition at Miami College. You're a certified exercise physiologist, you're educator and content creator, and you're a best-selling author. Did I include all relevant? Did I miss something?
No, that's great. That's fantastic. Yeah, I just quit Miami-Dade College. I taught at the University of Miami for the American College of Sports Medicine, for DeVry University, Miami-Dade College, nutrition and exercise physiology, and now finally with my online brands, doing well. I quit so I can focus on the online, coaching, guides, all the stuff that I do.
Yeah, you're pretty active in all of the platforms, in Instagram, in YouTube. You have an active website.
Yeah.
You pop into my feed every day. So
Oh, good. That's good. It means I'm doing a good job with lead generation.
yeah. So I would love to discuss with you today about carnivore diet, especially because you talk a lot about it and you have looked at the research and you have also a lot of patient cases or client cases with that one. I would love to talk about weight loss a little bit, but then also link this to our common mutual interest, which is brain dopamine, and also food addiction. And then we can discuss about exercise and how all of these sort of link together and what can we do to balance our brain and food addictions.
All right. Where do you want to start? Carnivore?
So to start with, actually, let's definitely start with the carnivore. And even before that, I would like to start with stating that since we're talking about carnivore in this episode, we must by necessity be somewhat speculative because we don't have that many randomized clinical trials about this topic. However, we have a lot of research. I think the Harvard carnivore research is probably the widest at the moment and most significant paper on the effects of carnivore diet, and let's definitely discuss it a bit later. But to start with, just the stats that I ran into recently was that in 2020, 40% of US adults were reported struggling with mental health or substance abuse. And depression is now the most disabling condition in the world. And most people are actually estimated to get at least a depressive period during their lives. So at the same time, we have a snacking pandemic and addictions and metabolic illness and everything. So I think diet discussions are at utmost importance, and we really, really need to bring out even discussions about these lesser known diets, such as carnivore, that now has quite a lot of anecdotes to be very helpful. So can you start with explaining what is carnivore diet and how is that different from, for example, ketogenic diet?
So the carnivore diet is a subtype of a ketogenic diet, because if you want to define a ketogenic diet, it's basically any diet that restricts your carbohydrate intake to around less than 25 grams of carbohydrates per day. So a carnivore diet is like a zero carbohydrate diet. You could have a little bit here and there in eggs and some seafood, but or maybe if you're including milk, you might have a little bit, but for the most part, you're really not getting any carbohydrates from carnivore. So it's a subtype of a ketogenic diet. The difference is that on a ketogenic diet, there is no additional restriction on plant foods. So the only main element there is that you're not eating carbohydrates. Whereas with a carnivore diet, you're not eating carbs, but you're also not eating plant foods, right? If we go back to our evolutionary history. We ate mainly a carnivore diet because we evolved during a period, an ice age period, where plants couldn't grow. We couldn't, even if we wanted to, we did not really have access to plant foods. And so our genes are best evolved for not eating any plant foods. So that's like the real history of a carnivore diet.
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting. I read a paper from the annual reviews of nutrition about the brain size and brain development and different diets. And this dated back into, to Homo erectus and those like human species. And at that time, that was the most significant time of brain development. So you may have bumped into the fact that at one point the brain just kind of started rapidly developing quite fast. And that was the time when we developed hunting sort of equipment as well as equipment to cook food. And we weren't like carnivores at the time, but there was about 10 to 20% of the diet came from animal products, and all the vegetables and plants, we were able to cook them. So that significantly contributed to the brain growth, for example, at the time. And it seemed like one of the big benefits were including DHA and AA into the diet. So it's quite interesting to look back and see what happened during those critical times of development.
If you go back to our history and you see how we evolved and our brain size increased exponentially in size, it really, the first major boom in the size happened when we started eating raw meat. So we came from primates, we were eating lots of vegetation, and then when we started eating raw meat, you really see a major increase in our brain size. The other major boom that happened is when we started cooking the meat. And so we started extracting more nutrients from the meat at a higher concentration. And so those are like the two major kind of hints that the more meat we ate and the more cooked meat we ate, the more we evolved, and that really helped us become the apex predator. And then when you see what happened 10,000 to 12,000 years ago with the agricultural revolution, which is in the last 0.01% of our existence as a species here on Earth, what you see is once our main energy source, which was hunting animals, once that went extinct because we overhunted them and climate change on Earth, there was so much pressure on us to find some alternate fuel source. And so it was either starve to death or learn how to eat and extract nutrients from other food sources like plants, like harvesting grains and beans, and domesticating cattle so that we could consume dairy. So all this pressure on us forced us to adapt. And so then we started consuming plant food. And this is what we call the agricultural revolution. So this only happened in the last 0.1% of our existence as a species here on Earth. It's very recent. We haven't really adapted very well to that. Another really important thing is that if you look at our brain sizes before versus after the agricultural revolution, you see a massive, not a massive, but like you start seeing a drop in the size of our brains. So historically, while we consistently started getting bigger and bigger and bigger brains, all of a sudden, we stop eating a carnivore diet, we start eating the agricultural diet, and we start including more plant foods. And we see we start seeing a decline in the brain size, and more importantly, you start seeing also a decline in the stature. We start getting shorter. Our bones are more rickety and diseased, and you can actually see skeletal remains of our ancestors in the Paleo era, which is the carnivore era, versus the agricultural era, and you can see our bones are more porous. They're weaker. They're more likely to break. They're more diseased. Another really interesting thing that I like to always show my students, back when I used to teach in college, I would show them the jaws. So when our brain sizes shrunk, our skulls shrunk to accommodate a smaller brain, which means we no longer had enough room for a wide jaw for all of the teeth. So our wide jaws were no longer as wide, and so they shrunk, and that led to not enough room for our teeth to be aligned. So for the first time in history, you also start seeing misalignment of the teeth. So I think that's very telling with regards to what is our optimal diet as humans.
Right. Yeah, and I would assume that the standard American diet at the moment is definitely not the optimal, and especially since we have so much of these artificial foods that just, hack our dopamine system, make things imbalanced in our brain. Not only that, but like insulin resistance in the brain inflammation. It's like there are so many mechanisms that are now just started to be studied and are quite alarming. So, when did you first start the carnivore diet? Let's say, like, when did you start looking into the diet, and what spoke to you about it? Tell us about the epiphanies
Yeah,
that you had on the way,
yeah.
you know?
It was a long journey. I really started losing faith in the traditional advice that was given by dietitians and also by medical doctors around 18, between the ages of 18 and 22. That's because I had a lot of acne. It wasn't too bad. I didn't have cystic acne, but I struggled with not having clear skin. So I would see, dermatologists after the other, and they put me on everything. Accutane, I did it twice. It didn't do anything. I did birth control pills. I did antibiotics. I mean, I did all these things. And when everything failed, I started really digging into the research. That was around 2009, I would say, 2009, 2010. So the internet wasn't all that it was right now, but it was really starting to get populated with good health information. So that is how I discovered Dr. Loren Cordain, the grandfather of the modern paleo movement. He had written a book called The Acne Cure, and he doesn't even say the word um, paleo diet, I think, in it. He just talks about how hunter-gatherers societies, they don't have acne, even their teenagers don't have acne. And he talks about how it's not something that we should put up with, and it might very well have something to do with our lifestyle. And so he goes into the history, everything that we just talked about, and he basically describes that a paleo diet might be the ideal diet for clearing your skin, and you just have to eliminate grains, beans, and dairy, which is basically what I lived on. I mean, I grew up in the Mediterranean, in Lebanon, halfway across the world. So all I ate was, rice and beans every day, and that was considered to be a healthy home cooked meal. And I gave it a shot because I was just so at my wits' ends. So I gave a paleo diet a shot, and exactly like he says in the book that it takes 7 days, no, 7 days to start seeing benefit, but it takes 30 days to really see major clearance of your skin. And he was right. Like, I could not believe it. Can you imagine taking Accutane twice in your life?
I have actually
With
taken it. Yeah.
you have or you haven't?
I had like very severe acne, so much so that I was afraid to go to the shop to buy food. I was gonna say milk because I drank milk, and that's
Wow.
probably why I had the acne. Um,
Interesting.
but yeah, I also ate Accutane.
Did
It's
it
a
work for you? Would you say it
mm,
helped?
it helped, yeah, but it came back. It always came back.
It came back once you stopped. Yeah. So for me, it didn't work. And worse, it gave me cystic acne, which was a kind of acne that I never had before.
Mm.
So, and I did it twice. I was like, I just didn't know what else to do. So anyway, that was like my first kind of break from traditional advice and started really thinking for myself and realizing, wow, these dermatologists don't really know what they're doing. Even when I left Lebanon, because I did my bachelor's and my master's in nutrition dietetics in Lebanon, right after, and I came to Miami and I got my doctorate from the University of Miami. So I would also see the dermatologist at the University of Miami Hospital. Um, and I remember asking this dermatologist once, what do you think about the paleo diet? Because again, like nothing was working. And he was like, what's that? So it just goes to show you how little education they have when it comes to lifestyle factors. And they're literally just trained with regards to diagnosing, making a diagnosis. It's like, these are the symptoms. This means you have this diagnosis. And once they have that diagnosis, there's a standard of care that they have to follow. And they just prescribe pills or surgeries or some combination of both. So that was kind of how I started really changing my diet, but I still wasn't making the link when it comes to weight. When I started teaching, I remember because I didn't have any public speaking experience, and I remember having really terrible public speaking fear. Because imagine me like at 25, an immigrant. So I just came from Lebanon, and they put me right
Wow.
away at the University of Miami teaching American
Oh
kids
my God.
that are very close to my age. And I still didn't have enough experience. I started looking into all kinds of like anxiety treatments. I remember
Right.
seeing this doctor who gave me beta blockers. Not, it didn't, nothing worked. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And
What?
then, yeah, later on, I
For the
realized it was
stage
just
fright.
what?
For the stage fright.
Yeah,
Beta
stage fright.
blockers.
Yeah,
Oh my God.
for stage fright.
Well,
Yeah, it basically what it does is like it prevents your heart rate from going up, which is
hmm,
not really the smartest thing because you want your heart rate. Like if let's say you're not prepared and you do have a little bit of stage fright, you do want that heart to kind of like give you the energy. You do need the adrenaline.
hmm,
So I tried it a couple of times. It didn't work. The only thing it did is that it caused severe food craving, like really terrible. I remember coming home one time while I was teaching and I had taken some pills and I came home. First of all, it didn't work. I was still anxious. And then I came home and I took a nap. I felt so depleted, so fatigued. It's like a crushing fatigue. It's hard to explain. So I took a nap, and then when I got up, I felt like there's still a hole inside that the only thing that I could fill that with was a ton of cookies. So I went and I bought
right.
literally like 2,000, 2,300 calories worth of cookies, and I ate them all. So that was it. I was like, okay, that's not working. So I no longer took it. And then I realized it was just about experience. You just need to do public speaking. You need to expand your knowledge in nutrition. The more prepared you are, the less anxiety you're going to have. That is kind of what drove me into keto because I came across the benefits of keto for mental health, and so I tried it mainly for anxiety. And within the first 7 days of doing that, on the seventh day, I remember of a keto diet, I felt this kind of clearing of a brain fog. It's like something lifted off my brain. And I didn't even realize I had brain fog until it wasn't there anymore. So
Interesting.
yeah, that's
Very
how I got hooked
interesting.
on
Hmm,
keto. But it wasn't
hmm.
like I still had not made the connection with the weight, I went through a keto phase for a long time. I even wrote a keto dessert cookbook
Hmm.
until it clicked on, like it dawned on me that you have an issue with cravings, you have an issue with food addiction, and that's when I started doing even deeper research, and that's how I stumbled across the carnivore diet.
Right. And
Yeah,
was it easy decision for you to try it? Did you have any doubts whatsoever at the beginning, coming from a
yeah,
nutrition background with a highly different diet, highly
it was
different maybe
hard.
education,
Yeah, I was
all
definitely
that?
more brainwashed than your average person when it came to, the importance of fruits and vegetables. I remember I would, because my hubby was mainly eating a bodybuilder, like all meat diet, and he
Are you,
wouldn't,
so your husband was a carnivore?
yeah, and he wouldn't call it
Okay.
carnivore. He was like, bread is bad. Everybody knows that. I'm like, really? Who said that? Because I'm just so brainwashed. You need your 6, 7 servings of grains a day. So he was really carnivore way before I was. So I would remember like getting into not arguments, but like kind of pushing him and telling him like how important it was for him to eat more fruits and more vegetables and things like that. So it took me a very long time to really change my mind when it came to embracing a carnivore diet. And I had to do a lot of research, read the Plant Paradox book by Dr. Stephen Gundry, watched all of the, Joe Rogan interviews back when he was interviewing Paul Saladino and Dr. Sean Baker and everybody. And and then Paul Saladino at that phase was really pumping out a ton of really good quality content on his YouTube channel back when he was carnivore. So that was a major also source. Dr. Sean Baker's book was really good. Also, The Carnivore Diet had a lot of the basics that answered a lot of the questions that I had. And from there, I was doing YouTube. So also part of pumping out YouTube videos. If you notice, the initial phase of my YouTube channel was a lot of keto content. And then slowly you see it transitioning into carnivore. As a matter of fact, the reason why people kind of started knowing about me and my YouTube channel started growing faster is because I reported on that Harvard study. It was I guess I was the first person maybe. Once I posted that Harvard study video, I got 4,000 views in the first week. And then that's when I started getting invited to give interviews, and that's how it really started growing fast.
So this is very interesting. I feel like at the moment the nutrition research is somewhat confused and confusing. So nobody knows the truth. And the more I study nutrition, the more I realize that there is not necessarily a single diet that suits for everyone. But clearly there is this group of people who really, really benefits from carnivore quite extensively. I went to read that Harvard study, and 90-something% of the people, most of the people for sure, was on the carnivore diet for health reasons. What was your transition like? What was the first 30 days on the diet?
It wasn't as difficult. See, a lot of people go from a standard American diet to being thrown into carnivore, and it's just too much of a shock. And I don't recommend people do that. See, what I did is I did keto first. So my body was keto adapted.
Right.
You know, it was used to not having carbs as its main energy source and not running on sugars as its main energy source. And that's what I recommend people do. Like slow, unless you have an autoimmune condition where your symptoms are just uncontrollable. That's different. But I recommend slowly but surely decreasing carbohydrate intake. Allow your body to get used to burning fat as its main energy source. And then after that, we look at the things, you know, slowly but surely as well. Like, what are the things that are you most attached to on a keto diet? Lots of people will love their keto desserts. So maybe start to slowly taper that off because it's a drug. You know, keto desserts function like a drug in the brain. It's a source of dopamine. So if you want to remove it right away, you're going to enter a stage of withdrawals. It's like you're withdrawing from a drug. So that can be very difficult. A lot of people will say also like keto flu is an electrolyte imbalance, and I don't think it's just that. It's yes, there is a lot of that, but it's also a lot of withdrawals from carbohydrates, you know, and processed foods.
Right. So you just mentioned like a keto dessert is a drug for your brain, and
Yeah.
your PhD dissertation was about sugar addiction and exercise. But you have also extensively researched brain dopamine. So keto desserts usually use sweeteners, I would say.
Yeah.
But so you have drawn the link between sugar, dopamine, and also sweeteners and dopamine. Can you tell a little bit about it?
Right. So that was the topic of my dissertation, right? For 7 years, all I did was pour into the research on sugar addiction. Here is how sugar destroys your dopamine centers in the brain. Sugar is a drug, and the more I look into the research, it seems like it's more powerful than hard drugs. When I wrote my literature review, I did the literature review in 2015. And the studies that looked at the drug action of sugar only compared sugar and artificial sweeteners to cocaine. And it showed that rodents that were exposed to both and given free access to both sweetener laced water and sugar laced water, they consistently and cocaine. It was actually three groups. So you had cocaine laced water, so water mixed with cocaine. You had sugar, actual sugar laced water, and you had artificially sweetened water. And they were given free access to all three. 94% of the rodents or the rats chose the artificially sweetened and the sugary water over cocaine. So what did they do? They started increasing the concentration of cocaine. They're like, maybe we did not use just strong enough cocaine concentration in the solutions because there's no way that sugar can be worse than cocaine. Maybe like the same, but worse. So they did that, and the results never changed. The rodents consistently preferred the sweet taste, whether it came from sugar or artificial sweeteners, over ever increasing concentrations of cocaine. So yeah, those were the studies in 2015. Later on, as I was doing research for my YouTube channel, I came across later studies that were published in 2017, but because I had already written my literature review, they weren't included in it. But that really kind of snapped me out of my denial, because those 2017 studies did the same thing, only they compared sugar and artificial sweeteners. Actually, those studies were done on artificial sweeteners. They compared artificial sweeteners to heroin. And the results were the same. So the rodents also preferred the sweet taste over heroin. And when people always, the main comeback is that, well, we are not mice or we are not rats. It's like, yes, but every single addictive substance that has been proven to be addictive in rodent models has always also transferred to being addictive in humans. And then you can look at the brain scans. I don't know if some of the audience may have come across those brain scans that show how the brain of an overweight or obese individual has the same level of destruction of dopamine, just like people who have addictions to alcohol, cocaine, any drug really. It's the same brain
Yeah.
scan. Yeah.
Okay, so an important question, were these mice or rodents fed normally during this experiment?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. Say
Were
that
they
again.
were they fed normally? Did they give them food?
Keto, yeah, they were fed chow from like nothing. Yeah, it
Right.
wasn't even something that was, there was no difference except with the exposure to the drugs. So what they do is they give
Mm,
them all the drugs, and they give them enough time to familiarize them with the sensation and the effect of those drugs on their brains. And they then restrict the drugs, and then they give them free access to the drugs. So there has to be a little bit of restriction there, and then they give them free access to the drugs. But because those rodents have already been sensitized to the effects of what cocaine does to their brain, what heroin does to their brain, what sugar does to their brain, what artificial sweeteners, what they do to their brain, they know the feeling, they've been sensitized. Then you pull out all the drugs, and then you give them free access to them, and then you measure the response.
right. So you got quite a good insights on how foods, especially sugar and sweet taste, can be addictive. What happens in food addiction when it comes to people?
Right. So we were talking about those brain scans, right? That show the destruction of the dopamine. It's a destruction of the dopamine, and it's also a destruction of the dopamine receptors. So for dopamine to do its job to make you feel really good, why do we love dopamine so much? Because it allows us to be happy, have high levels of pleasure, be motivated, have sharp memory, be productive, energetic, all the stuff that we really love the feeling of. That's the function of dopamine. But you don't just feel it because dopamine got released. You feel those effects when dopamine is released from a brain cell and it binds to the receptor on an adjacent brain cell called the D2 receptor. We have different receptors for dopamine. You've got D1, D2, D3, D4, D5. But the one that has really been studied extensively within the context of addiction is the D2 receptor. And that's why we really focus on that. And so you consume a drug, whether it is sugar or any drug, it's all the same. Your brain releases very high levels of dopamine, supraphysiological levels of dopamine. Those high levels of dopamine are very stimulating to your brain and body. So your body freaks out because it doesn't know for how long you're going to remain in that excited, stimulated state. It's like you doing lines and lines and lines of cocaine. You're not going to sleep. You're not going to have an appetite. You're going to waste away, and you could kill yourself just from that addiction. So your brain is trying really to protect you. So how does it do that? It starts to downregulate or destroy the receptors, the D2 receptors at the cell surface of adjacent brain cells. So now, even though you're in consuming the drug and you're releasing all this dopamine, it doesn't have enough receptors for it to bind to. It's like this lock and key situation that has to happen. So now this cannot happen. So you could kind of override it a little bit and increase the dosage of the drug, which is usually what people do. This is how you build tolerance. You just increase the dosage of the drug and you release even more dopamine. And it'll work up to a certain extent, because the more dopamine you release, the more frequent the stimulation of those remaining D2 receptors, So frequency of stimulation does the same effect as if you have multiple D2 receptors being activated. But that, again, that only works for a certain period of time, because the more frequently you are activating those remaining D2 receptors, the more your brain is also going to adapt, and it's going to destroy even more D2 receptors, right? So over time, you start off with, let's say, a high level of D2 receptors, which means a high level of mood, high level of energy and motivation. And over time, as the addiction stays in place, that the D2 receptors start to drop, and with it, your mood and motivation start to drop and drop and drop and drop. And so the vast majority of the people engage in a drug, not really to get a high anymore. It's just they're taking the drug just to bring them back up to normal, just
To
to feel
normal, yeah, just
normal
to,
again.
yeah,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
So at this point, if anyone wants to know a little bit more about dopamine in general, like the pathways, the precursors, everything, I would like to refer to one of my videos. I actually have a couple of videos of dopamine. So you can, like, if the basics of dopamine are still a little bit confusing, you can go and check those ones. This is so interesting. Please continue.
Yeah. So basically, that's what food addiction and sugar addiction leads to. And by the way, it's not just sugar. There's a lot of things that are addictive, right? So what are the 5 main elements in food that are addictive? Sugar and artificial sweeteners. So I don't like to say sugar. I like to say the sweet taste. So this is the sweet taste that's addictive. Carbohydrates are addictive, like just starches, like breads, rices, pasta. That's an addictive food component. Caffeine, dairy, and fat and salt. So dairy is the sixth one, because I know I said 5. I normally don't say dairy, but if you really want to get technical, some forms of dairy, especially cheeses, they're high in casein. You can add that also because it activates the opioid receptors in the brain. So whichever way you want to look at it, 5 or 6 components of food that are addictive. Now, what does the food industry do? They combine them, because if you just consume one of those addictive substances by itself, it's going to be addictive. But then if you do that combination where you combine, let's say in a donut, you've got the carbohydrates, the starches, the flour. That's addictive. If it's a chocolate donut, it's got caffeine in it. That's another component that's addictive. It's fried, so the fat is addictive. Then they add in the salt, a little bit to bring out the taste, another component, right? And then the sweet taste. So you have increased exponentially the addictive potential of that food. So yes, no wonder people are struggling to lose weight. People are struggling to be healthy, because it's just so much stimulation for the brain, where it just zaps the dopamine. It releases all that dopamine all at once, and you're left with nothing. You're left with a gap in your brain for the next few days. And so this is why when people go on diets and then they allow themselves a cheat day, usually the hardest days are the days after that cheat day or cheat meal, because in that cheat meal, they've released and completely eliminated all the dopamine, and also, by the way, the endorphins and a bunch of other neurotransmitters. You release them all at once. So now your brain is running on empty for the next few days. And so the cravings are at their highest the day after and the day after and the day after. So it's a very real addiction. I don't think people truly realize what they're up against when they try to change their diets.
All of the nutritional brain scientists, neuroscientists, brain researchers that I've spoke with have brought up this exact same thing. That it's not only about how much protein should I eat, or how much fat should I eat, or can I use stevia in my coffee? It's really about the, like, not getting all those hits and causing imbalance in the brain. I love that you bring this up, because sometimes I feel like we get a little sidetracked when people say, I have this snacking tendency. What healthy things can I snack? Or then it's like, it's not really discussing on why do you have this snacking behavior in the first place.
Yeah.
What did you notice? What was your weight loss transformation? What do you think was the mechanism, or what contributed to that the most?
So my
Yeah.
30-pound weight loss transformation occurred several times, but the last time it finally stuck and I'm no longer yo-yo dieting is because so many things. I mean, I could go on for like hours talking about this, but I would say understanding addiction was a major, major element. And when you go closer to carnivore, because again, I think it's important to mention, like, I'm not 1,000% strict carnivore, you know? So like, you can even see, I always share every day what I eat. I have YouTube videos, what I eat in a day. But for the most part, I would say I'm carnivore. But if I have a little bit of mayo here and there, if I have a protein bar here and there, like, that's not technically carnivore. And I think people are relieved when they hear that, because then it feels a little bit more realistic and more attainable to do it this way. So I would say going as close to carnivore. I'll just say I call it carnivore. Some people might say animal based, because there's a lot of dogma in the carnivore community. It's almost like a religion in some cases, where it's like, if you have a piece of broccoli that was served in your dish, then you're no longer a carnivore, you know? And so I don't like to be dogmatic like that. So I would say going carnivore for me really helped me so much, because then I wasn't constantly thinking, I didn't have that food focus. Can I have this snack? Or can I have this whatever? It was like, it really distills your food choices to very few foods that are sober, really. There's no carbohydrates in there, so that's a huge element, and there's no sugar in there. Those are two huge addictive substances that you're just no longer consuming. So it's easier to stick to. So that was a major reason why I was able to no longer yo-yo diet. But it's more than that. I would say the biggest thing was really using what I worked on in my dissertation, the dopamine brain, which is basically what I put in my guide, the dopamine brain guide. Using exercise to repair the damage that occurred in my brain was kind of like the biggest breakthrough. Because I can tell you, yeah, carnivore helped me out so much, but then people try to do it and it's like, but I'm still having cravings and it's so hard, and you know, I still want to eat those other foods. And that's because when you're eating a normal diet and then you go on carnivore, when you were eating that normal diet, you were getting tons of dopamine hits from the food drugs that you were consuming, not realizing they were drugs. You just thought they were foods. So now you eliminated that and you went carnivore, and all of a sudden we talked about this gap in your brain. Now you're running on empty. There is no dopamine hits coming in, and you've destroyed your D2 receptors, so your baseline mood and energy and motivation is dropped. And it can take up to 2 years for the brain chemistry to go back to normal if you just wait it out. And this is why rates of relapse in addiction are so high, because it's very difficult to go through life for 2 years straight without dopamine or enough dopamine in your brain. It's just, you're going to relapse. So my dissertation tackled how to treat that, actually. The topic of my dissertation was how to use high intensity interval exercise as a treatment for sugar addiction, specifically on chocolate addiction, but it's the same.
That's
right?
fascinating.
Right? Because what is addiction? Addiction is a destruction in your dopamine activity, or it's the destruction in the number of D2 receptors. It's actually more than just that. It's a bunch of machinery in the dopamine system that it's all messed up. Everything is adapted in a negative way. But I think it's really easy to kind of focus on how the D2 receptors are destroyed, because we have the brain scans. You can literally see the destruction of the D2 receptors in the brain scans of people who are overweight or obese, and also people who are addicts to cocaine, alcohol, everything. So that's addiction. Addiction is a destruction in your D2 receptor concentration. What does exercise do? It builds those D2 receptors back up again. So if you want to treat the root cause of addiction, whether it's a drug addiction or a food addiction, what you want to do is target the root cause of addiction, which is this low or reduction in your D2 receptors. And you do that via exercise. Especially the more intense, the better. That's the trick. See, what a lot of people do is they'll go on a joyride, and while, let's say, a cardio joyride or like an easy class that's fun, and while those are great, if you've been sedentary, that's going to push you in the right direction. At some point, you will adapt to this level of intensity, whether it's running or lifting weights. Once you adapt, That means you've raised the D2 receptors from, let's say, very low to a little bit higher, but once you've adapted, you stay there. And so that might just not be enough to repair all the damage that occurred to your brain from decades of food addiction, maybe even other forms of addiction, because then we have something called addiction interaction disorder, where if you've been addicted to other drugs, that can also kind of seep into and lead to food addiction and vice versa. So you might be tackling multiple addictions, and most of the time, people who struggle with food addiction, they also have all other underlying addictions happening in the background. So you need way more, basically. And so you have to consistently raise the intensity of your workouts until you can repair the damage that has occurred. Why does that happen? I think that's just one more thing. Let me add that. Because dopamine is an anesthetic. So you need to give the brain a strong stimulus, a strong reason for it to manufacture this anesthetic that is dopamine, and to manufacture the machinery associated with dopamine. And so the way you do that is you do something very uncomfortable, which is exercise beyond your comfort zone. And the more intense you go with it, the stronger that signal to your brain to spend some of its energy and resources on creating more dopamine cells, more D2 receptors, more of the machinery that would allow a higher baseline level of dopamine activity. Yeah,
Right.
that's really important, because when people understand why, then they're more likely to do the work.
Exactly. And if I may add to this one, I think there are so many reasons that this is so logical. Because first of all, like looking at the Harvard study, people, of course, they reported what they are eating. Let me just take the study. I have it right here.
Yeah.
And what people naturally, obviously, restrict in this diet, people didn't eat sugar. They didn't eat candy or sweets. They didn't eat alcohol, which is one of the most addictive substances as well that we are generally consuming in today's world quite a lot. And there were almost non-fast foods eaten. So all of the things like the food industry adds the addictive chemicals to fast foods, everything is eliminated with this diet.
This is such an important topic that you that point you mentioned on flavors. Think of just water and sugar. Nobody really gets addicted to just drinking a sweet solution of water, but people love sodas. People love drinks that are flavored plus the sugar. So it's the adding the flavoring to the sugar mix. That's a very powerful addictive substance. And as more and more people are waking up to how powerful sugar is when it comes to addiction, and they're trying to minimize their sugar intake, the food companies are responding now by upregulating the amount of flavors, different flavors that they're using, right? And because they understand that that can be just as addictive and just as like it can hook you just as strongly, maybe even more so, but we haven't really kind of woken up to how powerful those flavors also are with making a food addictive. So just because a food is sugar-free or low in sugar, if it's got flavors in it, I would pay very special attention to that as well.
Right. My personal experience is this, that I never really used any sweetening in my coffee. I drink coffee and I didn't use anything, but I started adding stevia. I started adding these little sucralose drops. And I've noticed that I was craving coffee all the time, like literally all the time. And I was like, okay, understanding, a little bit about neuroscience and nutrition and how these things affect my dopaminergic system. If you combine caffeine, the addictive substance, at the flavor, I was like, this is making me addicted, just adding, sweetness into my coffee. So that was a real wake-up call for me when it came to this topic.
Right.
So far, we have discussed how basically brain gets addicted easily to foods, especially the ones that we find today on the market. And it's the whole another story how these foods are actually contributing to heart disease and contributing to just insulin resistance and everything that we find in the market these days, even neuropsychiatric disorders and mental health disorders. But they make us addicted. And you found through your experience and research and own journey that a carnivore diet was helping you to eliminate this kind of addictive component of your eating patterns and help you to lose weight. And then you basically used exercise to upregulate your dopamine receptors that are destroyed by sugar. So now I know people are wondering like, oh gosh, this sounds like a lot. And so now I need to stop eating and start exercising high intensity. It sounds so rough.
Yeah.
What is like the approach that someone, because I think it's kind of silly that sometimes people say like, oh, if you have addiction, you just stop doing it and then it's healed. It's like saying to a depressed person that just stop being sad, right? So
Right.
obviously
There's
you
a
help
reason.
people to, yeah,
Yeah.
you help people
Oh,
to kind of like overcome this phase that they can
yeah.
transition and smooth into this thing. So what's like
There
the
it
approach that you use?
right. You're right. There is a reason why addiction success rates, if you look at rehab centers and you look at their success rates, it's like 5%, and that's what they admit to. But I've interviewed some of the directors of rehab centers, and they tell you, some will admit to you that's even less than that, like it's 1%. If you're lucky at that 5%. It's notoriously difficult to treat addiction. And if you look at the rates of success of diets, guess what? It mirrors the same success rates.
Wow.
It's also like 1 to 5% success rates, long-term success rates, like at the 5-year mark.
Wow.
Right? This is why you have the whole, body positivity movement that has kind of stemmed from that as a reaction, because the diets don't work. So might as well just enjoy our lives as opposed to constantly be battling this thing. Let's not get into the whole topic of that. Let's focus more on, yes, what you said is people are going to look at that and they're going to think it's a lot. And yes, they're right. It is a lot. And that's why most of them aren't going to do it. And that's why most of them are going to spend their whole lives struggling with it and yo-yo dieting. And that's not a message that sells, right? And so this is why people usually, when they have fitness brands and in the fitness community, it's always like we always put our success stories, and we put all of that at the forefront. And if we make a post on how hard it is really to overcome this, it usually doesn't get as much traction. People don't want to hear it. They're looking for the next hack, right? This is why people, and I've been guilty of that. I've tried to like look for the solution everywhere. I've tried to get tyrosine supplements and L-Dopa and SAMe, and I convinced my doctor that I had hypothyroidism, even though my labs weren't that, it was normal. But I was like, no, I could make a case, given my scientific background, I kind of made a case for him why I needed thyroid medication up until like I took it and it didn't do anything. So sometimes people might have to kind of go through that. I just wish I could save them time and effort trying to work their way around doing the work. But there just isn't. At the end of the day, you're just wasting time. You really are. At the end of the day, the only way you're going to pull yourself out of sugar addiction, food addiction, depression even, because it's like similar, is having to do the uncomfortable things and training outside of your comfort zone. That is the fastest, quickest way to get out of it. Visualization is another major tool that has been a game changer for my clients. And then, by the way, if you look at every single champion that has won multiple world records, they all do the same thing, right? They visualize the race over and over and over again and how they want it to be. And they visualize themselves going through the uncomfortable feelings that come along with pushing your body and succeeding in doing that. So when you do that over and over and over and over again in your brain does not differentiate between reality and visualization. So your brain thinks you've already succeeded. And so then it makes it so much easier for them to actually succeed. So visualization has been a major game changer. And I would say that doing that over and over and over again, plus raising your baseline D2 receptors via training outside your comfort zone, that is the winning combo. It takes, though, work. and dedication. And that's where you have to really decide, do you want to do the work or do you want to keep looking for a hack?
That's very powerful. And I do believe that everyone has what it takes sort of to do it. But I think we have been fooled sort of also, or there is so much avoidance these days on if you feel a little bit uncomfortable, it
Right.
always needs to be distinct. Like,
Right.
oh, this is how you hack your anxiety. This is how you hack your fatigue.
Right.
Whereas what if we would just accept that actually anxiety and depression and fatigue are sometimes adaptive processes that are required to take us into a more stronger, resilient mind, because that's, as you said, that's what happens short term. How do you
Yeah.
know? How do you like? What's your best way, or what was it when you were doing the transition? What was your motivation where you tell yourself that, okay, I feel like shit now,
Mm.
but I know it's worth it? Or did you always know that it's good to feel it? Did you ever
Right.
hesitate that maybe this is not normal, maybe I shouldn't be feeling this way?
Right. I mean, because if you don't do the work, you're gonna see people think that if they just settle in a way that they're not gonna suffer. But you still pay the price of regret. You still pay the price of not living the life of your dreams. There is a price always that you're paying. And so if you're going to pay the price and feel bad regardless, might as well bring that bad feeling upon yourself in a controlled manner where you can gradually increase it so it's not too bad, right? And then you adapt to it to where you get to a point where you kind of enjoy it in a weird way. That's a whole other topic, you know? So might as well get something in exchange for feeling bad, because either way, you're going to pay the price. It's just, do you want to pay the price of regret and feeling like a victim, feeling all those negative feelings that come from knowing you're not living up to your potential? Or do you want to pay it in a way where you're paying the price of change, because it's going to cost some discomfort, to change your body, to change your mental health, to do anything worth doing is hard, but that's not, again, it's not a popular message, like every time if I put the word cardio in a YouTube video, it's gonna bomb. People aren't interested, what you put something like easy fat loss, or lose 7 pounds in 1 week, or like fast, quick, and easy. That's what gets the clicks. And so you kind of want to, not you kind of, you must train your brain to reject automatically anything that's free and easy and quick. Because just know automatically that that's a band-aid. That's not really that you're just wasting your time. That's not really changing you in any positive way.
Yeah, I love that. Such a good message.
Yeah,
Such a
because
good
I've been
message.
through that. That's why I'm so
Yeah.
passionate about it. Because I was that person who was constantly looking for the hack. I was that person who was constantly buying like tons and tons, every supplement under the sun. I did all that, the heavy metal chelation for the detox. I mean, the hormones, nothing worked. And I mean, unfortunately, I kind of had to go through it before I kind of woke up at some point, like, enough, I'm going to do the work now. So my hope is that I can kind of tell you, like, whatever you think is wrong with you, there's most likely nothing wrong. And most people who lose weight have imbalanced hormones. Most people who lose weight don't have optimal thyroid function, but they still do it anyway. Later on, you can fix that and optimize your health. That's great, but that's a different, separate goal that you can attack after you lose the weight. I think losing weight is so much easier, and it takes a shorter period of time.
Right. Powerful. Can you give a brief overview on your current protocol?
I wake up and I either right away start with running. Running is a major part of my life because it's such an easy way to kind of visualize your baseline dopamine level. So the more intense the running gets, the faster I get. This means I now have higher levels of D2 receptors in my brain. And so it's really exciting to see that number get better. I just hit a new record yesterday. I hit 8.4 miles per hour, which is insane. Now, I'm not doing that consistently. So what I do is I start at so yesterday, here's what I did. I did 6.1 miles per hour for the first 4 miles. And then after that, I walk a little bit and then I start with the sprints. So then I warm up a little bit and I do like 7 miles per hour for a few minutes. Then I walk a little bit, then I go 8 miles per hour for a few minutes. Then I'm ready to train at the edge of my limit. This is really what counts. Then I was able to hit a new record, which was 8.4 miles per hour. And so I was able to hold that for around a third of a mile. Then I walk a little bit. It's in like an HIIT format, right? You walk a little bit to recover, then I hit it again, and then I walk a little bit, and then I hit it again, and then I walk. Sometimes I can do two more of those intense bouts. Sometimes I just stop at like 3 intense bouts interspersed between walking recovery episodes. That's the cardio. And then I'll lift as well. Now, I've been lifting for a long time. I don't need to be lifting right now, my goal isn't like to be lifting every single day, but I go through phases, you know. Sometimes I get really excited because I'm hitting records with the cardio and I focus a lot on that. Then I kind of like maintain that and then I focus on the strength training. But I always strength train. I make sure I hit every major and minor muscle group per week. And so my strength training, depending on which phase I'm in, can either be 4 to 5 sessions a week, full hours, or it can be just like 30 minutes here, 30 minutes there, which is currently, that's my current phase. And that's really important for people to know that you can do just like a total of 60 minutes of strength training and still maintain, like I'm not losing any muscle. I do the tests and everything to make sure it's working. And that's been also another game changer with my clients when we have to have them focus more on the cardio if their dopamine system really needs a lot of attention. So we'll focus a lot on that. And a lot of them are afraid of losing muscle. I'm like, don't worry. I show them there are studies that prove that you're not going to lose any muscle as long as you activate and you hit every muscle group with one working set once a week. And then after they have a few weeks of that and they realize that their strength and muscle mass is not decreasing, they relax, and then it really helps them be flexible with their time as opposed to feeling like they have to do everything all at once. So, but yeah, that's kind of like what I do right now in terms of exercise, if that's what you meant.
Yeah, and actually for this afraid of losing muscle, I also noticed that when I went from heavy lifting plus cardio, I went to, cardio with weights, quote unquote. So it's like you kind of increase the reps, but you don't go to your max. So I would do like 20 reps, 15, 20 reps per set with weights.
Right.
And that would get my heart rate up, but that would also bring muscle growth benefits.
True.
And I find this super effective. It kind of combines both. But I also love those sprints in a treadmill. It's so good for the mind. You just feel like a winner afterwards. Even if just 5 minutes.
Yes, you feel like you're a super breed human. It like opens up your mind. It's like, you know, that movie Limitless with Bradley Cooper where he takes that pill and it's like an Adderall kind of pill. That's exactly the feeling that you get when you do those sprints, because again, what you're doing is that you're raising those D2 receptor concentrations in your brain, and so now you've raised your baseline dopamine level. It just feels amazing.
That's powerful. Thank you so much for this interview. I'm so fascinated by this topic, as you know, and I know you're too. So can you let us know where people can find you? All the links, sites, everything, where you are.
Yeah, thank you so much, Inka. This has been fantastic. It's very easy to find me. Just on YouTube is my name. I don't know if it will show on screen, but Dr. Sarah Zaldivar, Sarah with an H. Instagram is at dr.sarah with an H. Zaldivar, and my website, which is probably the most important one because that's the one thing that I actually do own, and it's drsarahzaldivar.com. /shop if you want to get the guides like dopamine brain and dopamine body and the mindset. I think the mindset guide is very critical. This is where they'll delve deeper into the visualization, because I think, you know, the dopamine brain is so critical for attacking, raising your baseline dopamine and attacking addiction. But then the mindset guide and the visualization, I think they have to, I don't know, they have to go together. With the dopamine brain, it's so powerful, but it'll take longer for some people depending on how long their addiction has been. So if you've had decades of addiction and now you understand how to treat that and raise the D2 receptor number, dopamine brain is going to be fantastic. But I think you need so many more reps under your belt to change the habits, as opposed to somebody who's only 20 years old and had a shorter history of addiction. So less intense habits have formed in their brain. You see? So the power of the mindset guide, it's called Monster Mindset, and I delve deep into the visualization in it. So if you get that's like, I don't know, probably it supercharges the benefits by 1,000%, you know?
I love it. Thank you so much. Everyone go check Sarah's guides and Instagram. It's fantastic knowledge there. Thanks so much, Sarah.
Thank you.